Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, Associate Professor of Communication at Lund University. Remember, you can follow the show on X at SMNP Podcast or visit us on the web at socialmediaandpolitics.org. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm excited to finally be discussing the topic of artificial intelligence and political campaigns, which I know is something that many of you are interested in or working with, and it's something that I just have actively chosen not to cover yet because there's just been too much speculation. The timing just didn't feel right. There was too much what ifs and not enough what is. And I think with the slew of elections that happened last year in 2024 and the widespread adoption of generative AI, we're now in a position where we can sort of look back and say, okay, here's how campaigns have used and are using generative AI tools, and how is AI changing or not the logics of political campaigning. And my guest to discuss this is Dr. Michael D. Cohen. He is the founder and CEO of Cohen Research Group and author of the book Modern Political Campaigns: How Professionalism, Technology, and Speed Have Revolutionized Elections. Now, Dr. Cohen has been on the show before talking about this book back in 2021, and I'll put a link down to that episode in the episode description. And I can only highly recommend the book because it provides a great overview of all the various parts of a campaign, and it's written in a very matter-of-fact style of here are the various components that campaigns are thinking about, and here are the various aspects of their organization that try to reach these goals. And so Dr. Cohen has updated that book, including a new chapter on artificial intelligence, and I thought, yes, this is exactly the person who I would like to ask first, how is AI actually being used by campaigns on the ground today? And second, what are the implications of this technology for campaign practices and organizations moving forward, which is exactly what we'll discuss in this episode. So I can highly recommend picking up a copy of the second edition of Modern Political Campaigns. There'll be links down in the episode description. But without further ado, let me turn it over to Dr. Michael D. Cohen. Again, he is the founder and CEO of Cohen Research Group. Dr. Cohen, thanks so much for taking the time out, and welcome back to the Social Media and Politics podcast.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
So here we are, a few months out of 2024, where a huge number of countries had elections, and we got to see campaigns' first attempts at using AI. And your book is focused mostly on US campaigns, but I do think the lessons apply globally. And you've described AI for campaigns as a shortcut to professionalism by offering campaigns a kind of automated intern or junior staffer. So can you unpack this argument for us? How is AI contributing to the latest development in campaign professionalization?
Well, it's a really good question. And, I'm looking forward to answering this one in particular. I think, generative AI is really a way for underfunded campaigns to get help. It's not unreasonable to believe that when you look at a small campaign, which is like a mayor's race or a county commission, sheriff, dog catcher, any of those, they're not running the same kinds of campaigns that, prime ministers and chancellors and presidents are. They just don't have enough money. So what it is, it's really narrowing the starting point for politics. It's a tool to generate that first professional draft that might take hours or days for a junior staffer to write. Now, don't forget, most people who are working on these kinds of campaigns, they either live in the area or they're college students. This is really their first run at a campaign. And so, to get really straightforward, clean copy, that gets a little bit of research in there is not the easiest thing in the world for a student to pull off, right? Or even like just a local activist. And so this is like that shortcut for that. But really, it's all in what comes next, in what you're editing from the output. You need to give that raw draft context for the candidate, the campaign, and the broader political environment.
Yeah. And I mean, these tools, at least as they're priced now, are so cheap, right? They're either free or ChatGPT Plus is currently going for something like $20 a month, which is probably less than you'd have to pay an intern for just an hour. So these tools seem particularly useful for down ballot races or, parties and electoral systems where fundraising is capped. adapt. So, in your view, what are the most beneficial campaign practices that AI can contribute to for campaigns with smaller budgets?
First of all, let me zoom out for a couple of seconds here and just let's take in like what this is and what a big shift it is. Usually when a big technology comes out that political campaigns adopt, it's usually at that top level first because they can afford it, right? And then what happens is over the next cycle or two, they sort of refine the methodology of how they're using it. And then it gets cheap enough because they scale to the point where smaller campaigns can actually use these things. So, for example, not every campaign can use data analytics because it's actually very expensive to hire a team to do that. But now it's actually a lot cheaper. You used to have analytics for social media that were extraordinarily expensive, and now that's a lot cheaper. So there's a lot of things that used to be very, very expensive in that first wave of development and release that are really not the same way we're doing with generative AI here. This is the first time a campaign technology has been released to every single campaign at a price they can afford at the same exact time. So you have to understand that there's a lot of experimentation going on in the field at all levels. And the people who are actually getting the most benefit out of this is really the smaller campaigns because the elite campaigns have people who can write great copy, have people who can strategize, have people who know how to get a message out there and where to target it. Whereas like these smaller campaigns, you just don't have that kind of ability to hire those professionals. And so now what you're doing is you're seeing, okay, well, I don't have to hire a vetting team or an opposition research team because I can do a lot of this research, through ChatGPT or another platform. Given the right inputs and adult supervision, you can create more content so you can actually compete online against maybe somebody who has a lot more money than you do. You can respond to attacks quicker. It not only gives you more information, but the technology improves the speed and the time. And that's the one thing in a campaign you can't influence at all. I mean, you can raise more money, you can get more people to work with you, you can put out more content, but you can't compress time. And so the idea that you can now respond quicker when you're attacked or when you have an opportunity is very impactful for smaller campaigns.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about this idea of all campaigns having access to the technology at the same time,
It's the first time ever. Yeah.
which is actually quite crazy when you put it that way. And I think, a lot of the campaigners that I've interviewed on this show who, they got their start, back in the Bush days or the Obama days because they were just kind of the youngest guy in the room and they had some familiarity with digital technology. Whereas this is kind of a different dynamic, right? You could still be like a mid-level staffer or the youngest person in the room, and now you all have access to this technology that can make you, in a sense, a very good copywriter very quickly.
Or at least a clean copywriter, because like we'll talk about this in a little bit, but my perspective on this is that you get clean copy, but you may not get inspired copy. You may not get copy that really hits the right candidate. You may not get copy that's creative, but you will get copy, right? And you will get copy that's you don't have to spend another hour on cleaning up. You just basically have to look at what you're getting and then put it into context of who your candidate is, who the audience is, and what use case this is for, and then revise it. What I usually call offline adult supervision for these things, and then you end up with something that you can use. So it's a really good drafting tool if you want clean writing, but it's not going to come up with something that is so incredibly creative that you're going to be like, oh my god, that's amazing! Wow, I don't need staffers anymore.
Right. Because it seems like the differentiator, apart from, as you said, the supervision part, is also the input side, right? The prompt writing.
Yes.
And that is something you talk about in the book. And you discuss this framework for prompt writing called the Risen framework, which you add a dimension to called coaching. So can you discuss the importance of prompt writing for campaigns and how coaching AI is important in a context where real world developments change even faster than these AI models can update?
Absolutely. And don't forget, most of the people who are using the models do not have current information. The free versions basically cut off, a few months ago. And so that's not worthwhile for a campaign. But anyway, my point of view when I look at this stuff is we have a cliche in my business, the polling and research business, garbage in, garbage out. It's a cliche, right? So whatever you put into these prompts, is going to put into context what you're going to get out. And it's all in how you prompt the chatbot and what additional context you give it. with previous posts that did well, speeches and data. And so this, risen thing that I didn't come up with. I mean, a lot of people have sort of like talked about it. For those of you who don't know, it's the role that you're asking the AI to play, the input that you're putting in, the steps that you want it to take, the expectation of what you're going to get out of it, and then narrowing. And so an example that I would say would be like you're a speechwriter for a political candidate who supports Ukraine. Please write a 10-minute speech about how important Ukraine is to Europe, how dangerous it would be if Russia took it, and what it means for the future. Use speeches the candidate has given on the subject and use a tone that's urgent but positive. The outcome of the speech should be persuasive for voters who are skeptical of or concerned about supporting Ukraine. Do not focus on Donald Trump's involvement in the conflict. And then you get something out. And then what you do is you coach it based upon the feedback that you get. And so you say, okay, well, no, I don't want to talk about this part of the discussion. Let's focus a little bit more here. That paragraph was a little too negative. Can you make that more positive? And so this is the kind of coaching that you would do for a junior staffer. And all you're doing is telling ChatGPT the same kinds of instructions. And then at the end of it, you get something that's reasonable to then socialize inside your team. So then you can show it to the candidate, you can show it to the team who is in charge of social media, and then you punch it up, right? Like what you do is you say, well, okay, does this fit the style and comfort level for the candidate? And then you go through a couple of drafts back and forth with whoever's on the team, and then you have something that's really usable. So what this does basically is it helps your junior staffer get to something that's usable to understand within the team, not necessarily something that you're going to release outwardly. You basically come up with a better draft and a faster draft than you would have in the first place. And then on the coaching side, you're coaching the AI to get to that better draft. And then after it, you're coaching the team, the people who is like the candidate and the person who is like the campaign manager and whoever's also in charge of whatever content you're pushing out. Then they coach the staffer and they say, okay, next time you ask ChatGPT for something, ask it this way, or, this is why this isn't great. Let's talk to you about how we get to great, and how we get to more creative, not just you giving me this thing that you got out of a ChatGPT, but you internalizing it, you putting a creative spin on it, you understanding the context, and then we can have a much richer discussion.
Yeah, I just want to go back to that prompt and say that was a great prompt, way better than I would have ever done.
I've done some thought about this. Yeah. And not only that, but I think, there's a lot of people who are doing some good work on this, including Eric Wilson, who we both mutually respect. He does a really good podcast called Campaign Trend and Email also. And I would encourage the people who are listening to this podcast to also cross-listen to that one. Yeah, thank you for that on the prompt. But like when you look at the framework, you say, okay, well, it changes how you ask the prompt, right? Because you're trying to hit all these things, and that's how the AI interprets what you're getting. So in a sense, you're trying to meet the chatbot where it is, which is the more direction you give it on the front end, the better content you'll get on the way out.
Right. But what you also alluded to there was that you also need to be able to interpret the output. And so there is still this element of human interpretation and judgment in order to go back and coach either the chatbot itself or the staffer who's writing the prompts. And this human judgment comes with experience that at least currently can't be modeled by these technologies. So what types of characteristics or qualities do more experienced campaigners have that AI currently struggles to effectively replicate in its copy?
Yeah, I mean, experienced campaign managers just have this intuitive feel for a race, and it's based on knowledge. It's essentially the shortcut to experience, right? So if you've worked on 25 races in the state of California, you have a good feel for what works in California, right? And so if you're going to be writing prompts for AI and you're in Colorado or in New York, and you really don't have any familiarity with California or even specific parts of California, you may not have a good sense of like, okay, well, this sounds good to me, but oh gosh, it won't work in California. The other thing is that it won't come up with anything that's creative. Like, I think one of the things that we need to understand is that these things are tactical tools. These are not strategic tools. We are not at the point right now where the AIs even themselves tell us that they are reasoning tools, right? They are tactical identification of what might be the next, character or word or whatever next. It's guessing, at what you want to hear based upon the information that it has. But it's not taking that next step to reasoning. Strategic thinking is based on reasoning. And right now, that's really the purview of experienced campaign managers and people who work in politics. You're never going to get the right theme or slogan from ChatGPT, but you're going to get solid research and a starting point for ideas. But like the human element then is to take all of that research that ChatGPT could do better than we can at this point, but take the next step, which is only the thing that humans could do right now, which is reason, and also put it into context based upon not only political experience, but also what's going on in the world right now, which these models can't necessarily do. Pros in the field know what works, and their pattern recognition is better than the pattern recognition of AI in a political sense at this point. To be able to analyze a situation quickly, but come up with a strategy that's going to work. And I can't say this enough, but like we are just not at the point right now with these tools that they are strategic tools. They are tactical tools.
Yeah, and I think the same very much goes for students in writing essays, right?
Absolutely.
It can be a great tool, but they can't really generate that new idea. But that's something I want to come back to in a second. But I want to stick on this idea of teaching tools, because going back to this idea of AI as a junior staffer, you talk about in the chapter how the text produced or the output of these models can be good for mentorship between junior and senior staffers. And so that got me thinking that even though AI may lack some of these human qualities of experience, for example, it still could be something that junior and senior staffers can discuss to try to train up these junior staffers more quickly. Do you see these tools as a shortcut, not just for professionalism, but also for teaching and knowledge transfer between practitioners?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think it's actually really good. So any tool from my perspective that gets staffers talking vertically is an opportunity for development. And generative AI can definitely do that. What you find in the field is that more experienced leaders will tell these junior staffers, here are the limits, and then encourage them to think more creatively beyond what AI spits out on first draft. Because like for a lot of junior staffers, they're just happy they got the prompt right, they got something, they know they're under time pressure. Here you go. What do you think? Well, what was your take on it? Oh, well, I didn't have a take. I just got this thing done for you.
Right.
Right. And that's where you get the next step, which is like, an enlightened, leader will look at that and say, okay, well, let me tell you why this is limited or why it's good. And then based upon my experience, the way I look at this, well, based upon your knowledge of the campaign, what do you think? And so it ends up being a real conversation starter and an opportunity for knowledge transfer, like you said. But it only matters if, for example, the time pressure is such that they have the time to have that conversation. Most of the time they will, which is sort of like counterintuitive. You think that like there's no time at all in campaigns. There's plenty of time in campaigns for people to talk and for knowledge transfer to happen. But what's nice is that the junior staffer, instead of just sitting there watching someone write, comes to the table with something, maybe a couple of ideas about it, and then all of a sudden you're having a much different conversation than if you told the staffer to go write a speech. It comes back, it's completely crap because there's spelling errors and grammar errors all over the place. It's detracting from like what they're trying to say. Instead, you get a clean draft of something that may not be very inspiring, but then you can have a conversation about how to make it more inspiring or more compelling or more interesting to the audience. And I think that that's an opportunity for junior staffers to really grow quicker, because then they don't have to worry about, oh God, the pressure of a first draft and an open window in Word, and how am I going to where do I start, right? So they get this sort of like jump start, and then it's incumbent upon them to improve it before they go and have this conversation with the experienced staffer. And then if they do, then it becomes a really much better conversation than, oh, you know what? Your writing sucks. I can't read this. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you will get something out of ChatGPT that will make sense and be clean, but then you could have this much higher level conversation between the two staffers about what makes it really sing.
Which makes me think, and I want to get into some different aspects of AI beyond text generation in a second, but we're all kind of thinking about like, what is the effect of AI on campaigns now? But I wonder if we see across both down ballot and top of ticket races this type of knowledge transfer, this type of junior staffers that are already coming in kind of leveled up because they have the AI behind them. I mean, do you think we're at kind of the starting point where, 20 years down the line, we're going to have just, a completely more professional level of campaigners across all levels of government because they've started out from here?
I would think so. I mean, if you look at this in my rubric, where I think this is basically a tool, um, we used to write out speeches by hand, right? Then we had typewriters, then we had word processors, then we have computers. Now we're dictating them, on our phones. I mean, all of those things are upskilling people because instead of having to deal with the mechanics of putting something together, you're then freed up to think more creatively. And so any tool like this generative AI stuff today and 20 years from now that allows us to think more creatively is a win. You'll just get better campaigns. I don't think we just default to letting the AI tell us what to do. I mean, I've worked in campaigns for too long to know that those people, they'll never, ever, subcontract out a core message or something that's really like authentic about the candidate to the AI because the AI is telling them that they'll win or something. Like, I don't think we're ever going to get there because I just think that's just the natural personality of somebody who's either running for office or working on a campaign.
Well, that kind of precipitates my next question, which is about pivoting away from text generation, because of course there's a clear value as a tool for these technologies to generate, speeches or copy for social media or images or whatever it is. But you talk a lot in the book about the campaign plan, which is this document that the campaign develops. And one of your key messages is that the candidate needs to have a clear and very convincing argument for why they are running in a campaign. And so I was thinking, I mean, do you think that AI can assist in drafting this why message? So in a sense, kind of storyboarding the entire campaign, or is that just too much of a creative leap for these tools to do convincingly, do you think?
So if you're asking AI for reasons why you're running, you're doing politics completely wrong. As I say in the book, it's like these are very candidate specific criteria. You don't want to outsource that core belief to any tool. Not only will it be wrong, but it won't be authentic to the candidate. And we're in a situation now where we have excellent tools for generating ideas, but they aren't therapists and they're not campaign professionals. And again, they're not reasoning tools at this point. They're tactical, they're not strategic. And I hope that remains that way forever. And I think that campaigns that cross the Rubicon where they decide, okay, they're going to outsource that kind of stuff to the AI will find themselves losing a lot of races. I think that once you have the why, then you can figure out how to implement it. And that's where AI might be able to help years from now, right? Like where they can reason based upon why you're running, your core beliefs, who you are as an authentic human being, and then say, okay, given all of these criteria, what is your reasoning behind how we should run? There might be a way to sort of back end into a campaign plan there because you could always pull in all the right relevant data and all that. And maybe this ends up being a data point. But I mean, I know people who are working on this right now and they're not there yet. Okay, so they're working on it. They believe that they can get, a lot of these smaller campaigns, a real full campaign plan, which is sort of paint by the numbers. But to get to something that's really reflective of who the candidate is and what the current political environment is and all of that, I hope we actually never get there because then who are you really running? Is the AI the candidate or are you the candidate? And I hope that we never get to the point where people feel like there's good business to be made by literally just asking the AI, what do I need to do? And I think that there's, and maybe I'm, just getting old and I'm telling people to get off my lawn, but I think, there's always going to be a place for, humanity in politics, or at least I hope there is.
Yeah, it's getting too much Blade Runner for me, but
it's more like Westworld. There's the Westworld TV show. The last round of it really showed the dangers of just sort of outsourcing big decisions to an AI. I know that there's the Mission Impossible movie that's coming up, the second round of that. And there's put it this way, we're all grappling with this in our own spheres. But I think that it just seems to me at some point the human adult supervision point of this is really a big deal to hold on to.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And sort of pulling down to the more practical uses. I mean, I think one thing we've heard a lot on the show about is that in a sense, campaigns aren't really, dying for more creative input, especially top of ticket campaigns, right? They have entire creative teams that are working on and exactly hitting those kind of soft human points for them. But actually what campaigns need is more software that assists with things like budgets and accounting and finances. We've heard it talked about as a kind of QuickBooks for campaign.
That's smart.
That's what they really need. So what's going on with AI on the more back end side of campaigns that none of us really get to see except for the practitioners themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in contrast to the why, this is really a great place for generative AI, or just standard AI. Like I've called it like proto AI, like the stuff that we've been using for years. Basic analysis tools, data analysis, and those kinds of things. I mean, so you can think of things like a lot of tasks are really rote, like taking in donations, submitting reports, keeping track of how content performs, and all of this is basically back office systematic work that can be done by AI, freeing up the team to do the more strategic and creative decision making. And so I agree with you. I think that the big lift for campaigns is that you don't need, your office manager can handle a lot more things because they no longer have to keep their eye on the budget like you were talking about and other things. This is a way to make people much more productive on a campaign.
Right. Classic, just automating out things that are rote and freeing up time for more human pursuits.
Absolutely, yeah. And honestly, I think that's actually how, people like Sam Altman and others are talking about this. They're like, look, we're going to be entering a really interesting age where a lot of the work that we used to just do because we had to do it, we may not have to do anymore. And then we can do the things that humans are always going to be better at than a computer, or an algorithm. And to me, like that's really the opportunity here when you're looking at these things. We talk about campaigns in terms of like these are startups that have like an end date, right? And so what's the best use case for this stuff is to help you start up quicker and to be able to let you do the hard thinking to be successful, as opposed to spending all your time spinning wheels on like donation reports or meeting invites or, I mean, those kinds of things that could basically be done by an AI on your behalf. And so, I mean, to me, like that's a really, really exciting use of this that isn't exactly sexy because it's not, on some kind of social media platform.
Right. And I think, apart from the potential AI takeover, the next sexiest topic would be data analytics, if we judge by social media as any barometer. And another use case for AI is data analysis. And I think you mentioned it. It's somewhat unsurprising if you think of this in terms of quantitative analysis, right? Any of us who've done this type of analysis can say, okay, the AI can figure out your data. What's the right statistical approach? Da-da-da. But you write in the chapter how AI can also be helpful with qualitative data from focus groups, which is something that you work extensively with at Cohen Research Group. And I found that super interesting. How might AI help with analyzing qualitative data from small and non-representative samples?
So what data analysis is basically doing is like it's looking at, patterns in data, right? That we might miss is like overworked and just tired human beings, right? And so, from a quantitative standpoint, that's really interesting because like, when you have a sea of data, you might have a hypothesis that you're testing, but you might not see other relationships that you would love to be able to talk about if you had more time or you had more coffee, right? But if on the qualitative side, like when you're doing like small sample research, like focus groups, to me, that's pure magic. The idea that I can actually run a focus group and at the end of it, all of a sudden I have a summary of what happened there and not have to take notes and not have to remember the exact words and phrases. I can get that immediately. That's amazing because then we can act on it right away as opposed to spending an entire week collating the data, putting it into something that's a usable form, and then trying to figure out what to do with it. You can skip to the part of what can we do with it, right? And to me, like that's a huge boost in productivity in a campaign. It speeds everything up. The technology assistance is amazing. And also from a professional standpoint, if you're looking at it, intuitively because you were in that focus group, running it, okay, what was really important? And then you can basically do the coaching you need to be able to say, okay, well, all right, the summary came back and 4 out of the 5 things were exactly what I thought. One was kind of interesting but irrelevant. I can get rid of that. Then all of a sudden, instead of spending, a few days with the data, which is basically what everybody said, you can then skip to the part where you got, okay, I've got my 4 or 5 bullet points for the campaign. Let's go talk about them and see the feasibility of adopting what we're seeing here in the findings. That's a huge lift, okay? Because usually this stuff is really hard. Like what you end up doing with focus groups before all of this is you watch the focus group over again after you've done it. So like, let's say you do a night of focus groups and it's 4 hours. That's another 4 hours you have to spend watching it. But it's not 4 hours in real time. You're hitting stop, you're hitting replay. Hey, what did that person say? And before you know it, you've spent 10 hours on a 4 hour focus group, whereas you get the summary from AI. And if it's close, then, oh my God, you've saved yourself a ton of time. And then you could always go back and see more, at the right timestamps. And so to me, like the big lift from a research standpoint, which is what I do for a living, is on the qualitative side, because my God, I mean, it's just so much time is being compressed and you're just that much more productive.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking about, qualitative research, usually not so much watching video, but dealing with transcripts of those interviews. And on the one hand, the first, from a qualitative researcher, the gut response is, oh, but you're going to miss the nuance. And, there's something that you have to dig yourself deep in the data. But I do think actually that there is a risk that you're looking at the trees and not the forests. And actually AI is, because it's built essentially on pattern recognition, can help you at least with an external check on here's a summary. Does that match up with your qualitative insights? I'm more convinced that it's not as at odds as we might think, at least of how qualitative researchers are trained.
Yeah, I actually find, when you're doing qualitative research, one of the things that you're trying to do is trying to create themes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the summary is getting you to the themes. And like, that's a huge shortcut. And then from there, you can go back to those parts of the conversation to get more of the nuance if you feel like the summary is missing it. So again, either way, it is making the analysis time on this kind of stuff a lot more efficient. And so from my perspective, I think it's great. I mean, if I can get 80% from the summary, that's amazing, right? I mean, that's of 10 hours, it's only taking me 2. That means I can get something to a client at least a day or 2 quicker.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have some, I might have to pivot over to doing some more qualitative based studies in the future because, yeah, that is a great tool. But let's, I want to switch over back to that supply side of messaging, and in particular, the concept of authenticity, which we touched on a little bit here. Because whenever I think of AI, I think, that it's kind of the opposite of authenticity because you're having a machine that's, essentially built on pattern recognition, giving output for someone else to say. But then I also was thinking that, speechwriters for decades have been crafting up speeches for someone else to say. So on the one hand, AI, generative AI, is just the latest iteration of that. But then there's also something that's just strange with having a machine do it. So how do you see that dynamic of generating content from a machine? Does that sort of fundamentally go at odds with authenticity, or do you see these somehow reinforcing each other?
I feel like it's more, yeah, I mean, we've circled around this a bit, but it's definitely a major theme in the updated edition. You can't generative AI yourself into an authentic candidate, right? Okay. You have to actually be an authentic person to begin with. And the campaign needs to respect who you are and then lean into it. That's actually what really good speechwriters do. Like they spend a lot of time understanding who their client is before they write anything. Like they'll ask them a lot of questions. There's a lot of things that really good speechwriters and people who do this for a living do to understand who these people are. They'll look at their speeches that they've done before, but that's like just an input. But there's a feel that you have when you work with somebody who's a principal. In the jargon of speechwriting, like you work for a principal. And so the idea to understand that is like, you need to understand their persona, their language tics, how generally positive or negative they are, how aggressive they are. I mean, the kinds of words they would absolutely never use, the kinds of words they always use. Like people who worked with Joe Biden knew that he would tell certain jokes over and over again, so they'd sprinkle it in. Like understanding who somebody is just a very humanistic technique that speechwriters use. Now, when you're asking ChatGPT to do something for you, the best you could do is give that ChatGPT or other AI, you know, text from speeches. Like if you were to input video of speeches, I remain unconvinced that right now they are understanding nuance. They're just looking at data points, right? And so from my perspective, like that is really where we need the adult supervision again on all of this. Because if you lose the authenticity, you just lose the race. I mean, you look at the race between like John Fetterman and Emmett Oz in Pennsylvania in the Senate a couple of years ago. You know, Fetterman walks around, if you've never seen a picture of him, in a hoodie and shorts. He even went to the inauguration in that outfit. And Mehmet Oz said that he was from Pennsylvania when in fact he actually lived in New Jersey. And so the whole campaign hinged on, okay, is this person real or not? And you can't let an AI tell you, okay, all you got to do is say that you're from Pennsylvania and you'll be from Pennsylvania. Like you have to live in Pennsylvania to understand what it means to live in that part of this country. And it happens anywhere, right? I mean, you know, in certain parts of your country, people have different attitudes and different ways that they interact with people. They might be more aggressive, they might be more genteel. So you have to understand all of that wraps up into like what authenticity is. And what I think is that, and this is sort of like to your podcast, on social media, you really can't fake it. You just can't, right? I mean, the best thing a candidate can do right now is put their phone up to their face and just start talking. And people understand who you are in the moment, and they then make their value judgments. And so, to me, I mean, you're never going to get generative AI to get that right. And that's why there will always be a place for people to be involved in politics.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And then the other side of that, though, is something that you also hit on in the chapter is the idea of polarization. And in a way, one could argue that it's the exact opposite because partisans, people who are heavily polarized, in a sense, machine generated content is great for them, right? The machine can learn what is partisan. It can give more frequent partisan messages, and it can also up the extremity of that partisan message. So we were talking last time you were on the show about this idea of campaigning from the center out rather than the outsides in. So trying to kind of get those persuadable voters in the middle and then appeal to the flanks of the ideological spectrum. But it seems that in the context of polarization, that AI generated content could actually work very well in a polarized district by giving the partisans what they want. So how do you see this in the context of polarization? This relationship between AI and appealing to those partisan cues that I think, frankly, a machine could pick up on quite well.
Yeah, and this is where I think I take issue a little bit with the question. I don't believe generative AI is better or worse for focusing on core voters versus those in the center. I just don't. I mean, data is data, right? The inputs are the inputs. And so I don't think that ChatGPT and its siblings care who you need to win. You know, they react to prompts with all the opportunities and limits that come from it. So within the context of polarization, it's incumbent upon the campaign team to make the decisions to reach beyond their core base into that mushy middle where a lot of difficult campaigns are run. For those campaigns where it's a race to the base, you know, like primaries in the United States or safe districts, wherever, there are still persuadable voters. So generative AI isn't there to like get us beyond polarization. Like that's really on us. And so I sort of say, well, okay, again, this is the tool, right? And so if you're writing freehand content that is going to core voters, and then you have, you know, again, a typewriter, a word processor, computer, yeah, all of that is amplifying it quicker, but it's not changing the inputs. What really matters here is the inputs and then the adult supervision on the other side. And these come down to human decisions and strategic and campaign decisions. And so from my perspective, the data, you know, or the algorithm can always be tuned to get you to be there more often, right? Or more angry or whatever. But it could also be tuned to the center or to the persuadable voter and stuff like that. I know that persuasion is harder than it is just to activate people. And we've seen that, you know, in this country. But if You just give the algorithm different data and ask it to optimize for that. Well, I don't see any reason why the algorithms won't spit out things that you're looking for. Like those are just tools to transition data from one point to another. And if you give it core focused data, then you're going to get core focused stuff back, right? But if you give it center focused data, well then okay, maybe you come up with something. So for example, in our risen example, you can say one of the qualifications you want back is that you wanted to focus on persuasion as opposed to getting people out. So the narrowing there, you say, okay, this is an audience full of people who are skeptical of us or not convinced. And so the more information you give it, the more it should tune back to you what you're looking to do. Now, again, it's not that it's easier, but it really comes down to the responsibility of people who work on campaigns to ask better inputs, and provide better information.
Yeah, what I take away from this conversation is still so much of the human element, both from the input side and the, as you said, the adult supervision side, which I think runs contrast to a lot of the narratives we hear today. So, Dr. Cohen, thanks so much for taking the time out and providing us with a reasoned perspective on AI in campaigns.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I've just been speaking with Dr. Michael D. Cohen, founder and CEO of Cohen Research Group. Check the episode description for a link to the second edition of Modern Political Campaigns. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Social Media and Politics Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Next time, we'll continue the discussion of AI with AI and journalism, and we'll continue on from there with a focus on youth political expression. So just to say, pods are coming. But until then, I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Alma. See you next time.